Hello and welcome to Suzi's Book Bag, hosted by me, Suzifeay. I'm going back over some old recordings and talking to some of my favourite people, bringing them back in the book bag, seeing what they're up to and what they're working on now, and maybe doing a bit more of a deep dive into what their inspirations are. So without further ado, I'm going to invite back into the book bag that book bag favourite, Charlie Hill. Hi, Charlie.
Hello, Suzi.
Do you know, it's been 2 years. 2 years since we last chatted.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. You were one of the first people that I interviewed on the book bag. So it's time for a catch up. I have your latest book, Albion. This Albion, Snapshots of a Compromised Land. But last time we talked about I Don't Want to Go to the Taj Mahal and your wonderful novel, Books, Satire on the Books World. And if we kind of put all of them together, it's a slender but powerful body of work, I would say. And I think we talked last time about concision. Do you remember that?
I do, yeah. Yeah, it's it tends to crop up if I ever get to be talking about my writing, yeah. And yeah. Short stories. Well. Sorry?
You're now a poet, is that I was reading in this you're writing poetry.
I have published poetry, and but it's not actually very good, and it's just not, you know. I would love to be a poet. I would love to say, you know, here's a body of work that includes, you know, a significant number of poems, but I can't seem to. And yet everybody always says my prose is quite poetic.
Exactly.
So that's a bit strange, because my poetry is assuredly prosaic, which I think is one of the reasons that it doesn't really work. So yeah.
Stick to prose poetry, maybe. You know, follow Rambo's lead, and just write short, sort of mystical, strange passages. I mean, maybe it's kind of already what you've done. I wanted to ask you about this Albion. Is it a COVID book by any chance? Was it sort of put together during that strange hiatus period?
No, one of the pieces in there, which might have been the genesis of it, was a trip we took, and we were looking to have a holiday with the family in the UK, and so we went, and you know, and so that's one of the pieces. Now we went to the Highlands of Scotland, and that led to it. But essentially, it was just sort of thrown together. It was just like I'd been writing. There's a website called 3am, and they published quite a lot of my stuff, and they were just, and then I just realised there was a sort of a thread running through a lot of these short pieces, in that they linked place and that they looked at the sort of implicitly at the significance of place, and the effect it has on behaviour. You know, sort of psychogeography by another name. But no, I mean, I think one or two might have been COVID-y, but it's just generally just you know, stuff that I had gathered, I had written, not with the intention of putting them together, and then I just suddenly realised, hang on a minute, I've got, you know, more or less, you know, they're sort of thematically linked, and why not send them off as a pamphlet?
So how do you write these pieces? Do you have a notebook with you wherever you go? I mean, when you go on holiday with the kids and the missus, is there a thought somewhere, or I shall be writing stuff down? No,
there isn't. And it's a bit tricky, actually, because there are a couple of pieces in there where if the people who I went down to London for a friend's birthday celebration, and then I came back and I wrote it up. but there was never any intention of going down, and then writing it up. I just went down, and it was, weeks after the fact, I just thought, something had been percolated in my head, and it just came out. But I would hate, in a way, to think that I'm socialising and I'm sitting there taking notes, because it would just, that it wouldn't be. And then there was another one about football, which was in there, about a football team I play for, and then there was some quite sort of personal stuff in that. And again, I didn't mention it to I normally sort of say to people who play football, they're like, I've got another book coming out, do you want to come along to the launch and all this sort of thing. I didn't mention it because I didn't actually want them reading it and thinking, do you know what I mean? It was like, I don't want to give that impression. Although, it is inevitable that almost anything of any note that happens to me will end up in print at some point. It's just
it might alter people's behaviour around you is one thing, sort of, watch out for Charlie, he'll be writing all this down.
And yes, and and also it's also how I am in the how I am then in situations as well. And so it's a tricky one, because every now and again, if I'm if I'm on the bus on the way home, I might find a way of recording something if I've been out for a night, or if I'm walking back and I've had a few, and I'm looking up at the then I'll. But it's not really a question of going out with a notepad and pen. Although I have on occasion, because I think it's handy to, because there's more occasions when I come back from social events, or not social events. It's not like from
the mad social whirl.
Certain occasions, it happens more often that I haven't got a pen or a notepad on me or any way of recording it. And then I have a brilliant idea, and then I think it's a brilliant idea, and then I get home and then just forget it. So it probably should be more of a habit, but it's not really.
Is it a sort of emotion recollected in tranquility, which of course is the Wordsworth poetical idea? That you maybe have to let the experience bed down a bit before it finds the words.
And before you find out what the experience is as well. I mean, it just takes me a long time to process it. So, it's not like, it isn't necessarily the what's the word? What's the word? Begins with C. I was trying to think of this the other day. The translation of a particular, I don't know, cognitive process or a particular emotional experience into words. It's the way in which the various elements that feed into those processes and that emotion sort of coalesce. That is the first thing, and then the putting into the words is second thing. So it's not like you go away and think, that was a great experience, I must write that down, and then you just sit on it, and then you're able to write it down. You go away and you think, that was a strange experience, and then you're just processing it. You're actually trying to work out what it was, and then after that, you might then go, that might be worth writing down or not. But I think there's something in the middle for me anyway. I can come out of social situations, or and professional situations, and it would just take me a very long time to actually work out what's gone on. And so it's like and arrive at any useful, any sort of decent takeaways, whether they are, whether they can then be turned into prose, or whether I just use them to make sense of what's gone on.
And they tend to stop in a very definitive way, and sometimes they stop before the end in a sense. So that's as if you're leaving the reader also with this conundrum of how to process what you've just described. Is that deliberate?
That is deliberate. I mean, I love ambiguity in writing. I like reading writing that's has various different interpretations. And when you talked about concision earlier and poetry, although I'm not a poet, a lot of my short stories are very, very short, and so they require the same attention to each word as a poem does. Whereas I think if you're writing longer form fiction or longer form memoir, whatever, I mean, obviously you have to be careful with your word choices. But if you're writing an 80,000 word novel, there will be passages or sentences or word choices that you haven't even, you haven't felt the need to go over that often, if you like. Whereas if you write short stories, that it is that sort of precision, and it's through that you can then write and leave things open. I think if you didn't have that precision, then you couldn't just leave stuff open, because it would be I don't know. It's just it wouldn't create the same effect, because you are trying to create a particular effect, even though that particular effect is ambiguity. But ambiguity isn't just a question of being difficult to understand. It's more. I feel as though it's more involved from a writing point of view than that. You can't just knock something out and then just leave it hanging. You've got to have an idea of what the alternative interpretations might be, and for that you need to make sure that the language is spot on.
I remember talking to Matthew de Baitua about this, and he said, and this is about sort of poetic prose or highly wrought literary prose, over the course of a novel, you just have to have some plain declarative sentences in there that just move things along. Everything can't be sort of beautiful and ornate. I mean, quite apart from anything else, it'd wear the readers out. And it's not what the novel does, which I think kind of is what you're saying as well.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, you've got to establish a rhythm with your prose, haven't you? And you can't establish a rhythm if it's all, you have to have the sort of the short sentences. Everybody goes on about showing, not telling. But I mean, again, it's I think it's knowing when to tell, and when to sort of say this is now happening. The classic examples are sort of like, instead of saying a character was angry or whatever, the character kicked the cat or something. But every now and again. For example, every now and again, it doesn't hurt to say, they were, fuming. I think it's just, I suppose it's just a question of a feel for it. But again, I say it's rhythm as much as anything.
You you express something of a theory of your writing in this book, in this Albion, and then you kind of debunk your own theory. I think it's in the very last piece. Would you like to? The key to effective writing was to concentrate on the surface of things. Would you like to elaborate a bit about that passage?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was thinking about this. So I was looking at some of the questions that you mentioned, and that we might be sort of touching on, and about the books that had influenced me as a kid, and then what I've done as a writer. And there's sort of two sort of approaches almost that I take. Well, which is what is explicitly said in that piece you're about. Well, one is, the focus is on engagement and immersion in a particular situation, a particular set of characters, a particular circumstance or set of circumstances, and you properly. I suppose it's almost like a. If you could say it goes back to sort of a reading of streams of consciousness almost. And I read somewhere briefly. Well, I didn't read somewhere. I saw a headline. I saw a headline somewhere about, who was it? Irish writer who said that method acting had taught her how to write. Anne Enright, was it Anne Enright?
Oh,
No, it wasn't
right.
Anne Enright. It was very, very recently. I didn't read the piece. I haven't got around to it yet, but I will do. So obviously, but I just saw the headline and thought, oh, that's interesting. And then, haven't got around to reading it yet. But
Not Sally Rooney. She's
no, it wasn't
everywhere
Sally
at the
Rooney. It
moment.
was Eamon McBride. Eamon McBride.
Oh, right.
No,
Okay.
it wasn't Eamon McBride. No.
Oh,
I
never
don't know who
mind.
it was. Sorry, I should have known, but I saw the headline. I thought, oh, that's interesting. But there's that sort of so what you do is then everything is you go into things in a, and it's a very clumsy way of putting it, but you go into things you immerse yourself in situations, in personalities, and then the other way of doing that is the other way of storytelling, if you like, or communicating what you want to communicate. Is just to record the surface of things, and obviously the classic sort of, again, thinking about early inspirations. I read quite a lot of Fitzgerald when I was younger, and then I had a mate who was reading Hemingway, and it's almost, I mean, it's a very obvious sort of genesis of this contrast. But you have the Hemingway thing, which is the iceberg thing, which is just you talk about the surface, which is whatever it is showing above the water, and everything's going on underneath the water. And then you have Fitzgerald, who does more with, I don't know, he doesn't do more with language, does he? But it's just a different approach. Goes into
He's more elaborate. He's more descriptive. I think he's more surface elaboration than Hemingway is.
Yeah, I'm trying to give if that is a good example, because that has got nothing to do with streams of consciousness or anything, but and the sort of the, because I mean, I suppose it could go back to sort of the move from, forget it. I'm right. sort of I'm trying to think on the hoof, but I think the piece was just the piece was essentially boil it down to, do you just describe the surface of things and let other people do all the work, or do you take a position? So it was, I think the piece in the pamphlet was more, do you take a political position almost, or a socially engaged position? So it's slightly different from just the use of language and everything.
I began to wonder if I should do more than this, if I should perhaps be more explicitly critical, more obviously critically engaged, which sort of goes back to the subtitle Snapshots of a Compromised Land. But again, I sort of feel that you don't particularly want to finger wag or sort of tell people what to think. They are snapshots, and they're very artfully framed, and people can pick up what they want to pick up, rather than you saying, oh, look at that, that's a bad thing. You do a little bit of that, but it's not the aim of the whole book.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of writing doesn't interest me as a reader, and it doesn't interest me really as a writer either. And so when I established these two sort of oppositional approaches in that, well, I don't establish them, when I described them in that last piece, I think by the end of the pamphlet, or by the time that piece appears, it's already quite sort of clear which side I've come down on, really.
And
And
the photographs, photographs are all by you.
So sort of, I thought I could get away with it because of Sebald and his was it? I can't remember what was the one where he wanders around Norfolk and places.
The Emigrants.
Is it Rings of Saturn? Can't remember.
I think it's Rings of Saturn. Yeah.
And so I thought I'd just embed some I mean, it's obviously a completely different. The reasons for the use of photographs are completely different. It's just the kind of low quality of them that people can get away with.
Well, there's a bit where you talk about, oh, I'm going to try and get a kind of Martin Parr shot going here. And you don't really do that. And I wondered whether you were saying that, in fact, it's much harder to do a Martin Parr photograph than it looks, or whether you were, in fact, critiquing the Martin Parr style.
A little bit of both. I mean, obviously, this is I mean, I'm not a photographer, but this is, I imagine, a question that's sort of become more pressing recently with, issues of consent and things. You can't, I doubt you can now go up and do quite with the same abandon what, sort of Helen Levitt or, other street photographers were doing in the old days. Just go up, take a photograph of somebody. But I mean, I think in those days it would go and be developed in a dark room and then just appear in a gallery, wouldn't it? So the number of people seeing it would be quite limited. Whereas now, if you go up and take a photograph of somebody on the street, you do have to sort of ask yourself, how they would, how the objects, the subject of the photograph, would respond to seeing it without consent or permission given. And so I think that, so on that level, it is a sort of a critique, but again, it's not to say, I don't really think that I come down on one side. It's just to say these are now questions that are pressing and that are being asked when hitherto they wouldn't necessarily have been. The personal side of things, me feeling uneasy about going up and sticking a camera in somebody's face, or even from a distance, just because, particularly because of the composition I had in mind. It was a very particular type of composition. It was very sort of like it was, I mean, it was a very particular shot I was hoping to get, and so there was only a certain type of person in that shot that would make the shot work. And then it was like, well, that's just wrong. You can't just go, no, I don't know. No, it was just no. I felt a bit queasy about that, but equally, as you say, I did acknowledge the sort of the changing environment in which street photography is now taking place. And
yes, I don't think there are people in these shots, are there? Quite, quite deliberately so. They are, your sort of viewfinder of various places that you've been to. I mean, you get about a lot, but Wales, I suppose Wales is the traditional, place to go if you're in Birmingham, the kind of nice day out, is it?
It is, yes. It's obviously it's the closest coast to Birmingham. So obviously, as a kid, my grandparents were always going to Rhyl. We go sort of west, and there's a bit on the west coast between sort of Barmouth and maybe Aberdyfi, which is pretty much just, you go there and it's just wall to wall brummies. Few yams. It's like Birmingham by the sea. It's quite an experience. So it's just. But I mean, the thing is, well, I mean, it's just a beautiful country. But then it's just a question also of, you become aware when you're writing about it. Again, it's just like, it's just a place to go and visit that looks nice, and you go to take. You kind of go there to get away from it all, and you go into the countryside to get away from it all. But you aren't really ever getting away from anything in the countryside, because the countryside is the countryside for lots of different reasons. And the way that we as city dwellers just have this kind of the view of this of land, of the view of landscape, I suppose, in this country. It's got all sorts of connotations, and most of them are misleading. I think so. Yeah. So if anywhere you go, there are currents that sort of feed into what you see, and none of these places, even if you're in the middle of a farming community, and you say you're up the top of Cadair Idris or something, you're looking down and you can just see supposedly just green fields and valleys and things. It's all managed. It's all been created. It's all been man-made, and the forces that have gone into creating it are equally as sort of interesting and loaded and sort of political, I suppose, for one of the it's political and small p, as the more obvious manifestations of that in the city, where you can see, what I mean. I don't know if I explained that very well, but if you go out, you can see people on the street, and you can see poundlands, you can see chicken shops, and you can see shops that so it's easy to walk along the high street and just go, okay, I am in an environment that is a consequence of lots of sort of social and cultural interplay and lots of political decisions. Whereas if you're wandering along the path in the countryside, I think this is a way of if you're wandering along the path in the countryside, it's sometimes less easy, because these influences and these forces that are at play are less obvious, and so you just sort of like, there's a field and there's a tractor and there's that's pretty over there, isn't it? But it's still, the landscape is still the consequence of the same factors feeding into it.
And also, you're not doing the thing that's very popular at the moment, striding out into nature and being healed by it in some way. There's such a big literary trend at the moment, and you're not using that to fix or change you. You're kind of looking out at that itself and describing it. It seems to me, it's not about your inner life and how things feed into that.
Well, there's one piece in that where I set off along a coastal path thinking it would have that effect that you're describing, where you go along and it's like, and the thing is, it is undeniable, for all of the fact that you're walking along and you can look at a field and look at a farmhouse and look at a stile and look at a hedge and imagine or try to envisage as I said, these different forces that have created this particular environment. It is undeniable that it's also just nice looking at the colour green. I mean, it's people, it's great, and it does improve your mood, and it does, and if you're looking at a patch of grass, the fact that it's been stolen from somebody else, or it's been grazed by sheep that it should be grazed, and it should be tree, I don't know, whatever it is, right? You are looking at a patch of greenery, so it's lovely. But in the pamphlet there was an attempt. I did try and do that the once I went along the coastal path, thinking, geez, I really need a break, really need to get away from the city, really need to sort of just have that sort of feeling of whatever feeling it is you get when you look at the colour green, and then I just happened to be in a particular part of Scotland where there's a lot of ostentatious and obvious wealth, and the attitudes that can come from that, and people who are accustomed to certain cultural dynamics, and I just kept bumping into them on the path, and it was just like, you're really harshing my vibe here.
The people. It wasn't the colour
it
green
was.
or the styles; it was the people.
It was. But I mean, that was just a really a more obvious kind of illustration of being out in the sticks, and also being, also being unable to escape the way in which, unable to escape relationships, of power and interactions of class and classes and money and all of that sort of thing. It was just a more obvious, illustration.
Well, to go back to Fitzgerald, how old were you when you were reading Fitzgerald, and was he somebody who's very influential? Was he kind of almost the first writer that you latched onto, or were there writers before that?
I think he was probably the first literary writer I latched onto. I read quite a lot of Ed McBain. I mean, obviously, to draw a distinction between Ed McBain and F. Scott Fitzgerald is, on one hand, it's a bit much, isn't it? Because it's a bit like people never, it's only recently that, Chandler has come to be seen as just
a great stylist.
Well, he is, absolutely. But I mean, Ed McBain was a great stylist. But if there has been a point in the not too distant past where if you'd have said, he's a stylist on a par with Fitzgerald, it'd have been. So the first obviously literary writer I read was Fitzgerald. He approached his sentences with the intention of making them, with the intention of getting them to do things that I don't think Ed McBain was trying to do. but I was, I think that those were the two. And Fitzgerald, how old was I? I don't know, probably I was very young. The only novel I read was Gatsby, but I read quite a lot of his short stories. Mayday was one of the short stories I read that had a big effect on me. I think it was there's a collection called The Diamond as Big as the Ritz.
Oh yeah,
and then there was another collection which may have been, don't know what it's called, but it was. I think the other collection had Mayday in it, and I remember reading that and thinking, yeah, that's great. Really like that. And that was the first writer I was, and it was the first writer I got interested in as well, rather than the first writing I got interested in. So, reading Fitzgerald made me want to read about Fitzgerald. I didn't actually get to read about Fitzgerald other than through a biography of Zelda Fitzgerald, which was written by somebody called Nancy Milford. And I remember reading that very early on. So, I'd have been early teens, and reading that as a way of, just trying to get some kind of context, I suppose, for what I was encountering in the short stories and, and in Gatsby. Because Zelda, it's a good biography, actually.
Yeah, I think Fitzgerald is a good sort of literary gateway drug for teenagers, because the style is so there. You can see that something exciting is happening, and there's the glamour that's very appealing. And then coming to it later on in life, you can sort of see an undertow. You can get the melancholy underneath the glamour, for example. So I'm pretty sure I definitely read Diamond as Big as the Ritz as a teenager at school. And then you get on to Gatsby, because of course Gatsby is short, so that is a wonderful thing to read, isn't it? It's not, it's not. I mean, not that the Jane Austen novels are particularly long, but they seem long when you're a teenager and you have to, make your way through them. Now, yes. What's the most discouraging thing anyone's ever said to you? Can be about anything, really.
Well, I tend not to get discouraged if I'm sort of if someone tries to insult me, or if someone tries to discourage me, it generally has the opposite effect, and it just gets me going, really. And
Oh, lovely. Who is that?
that's
Oh,
Buskins wants feeding.
wow. Oh, okay. Sorry. Oh,
It's all right. I
God.
thought Buskins had been fed. Sorry, Buskins. Yeah. So you know, I mean, writerly wise, I've been quite lucky in terms of, because, you know, like, part of the writing life is you write a book and then the publisher says, can you think of anybody to go on the cover? And so you write off to some people and you say, can you read this? And generally speaking, I've had pretty good responses from that. And I've, you know, obviously, you know, there are occasions when you just don't hear back, and that's fine, but rarely have a negative response or negative feedback. And I think, you know, that's really encouraging. There was one, there was one anthology that I was in, and we turned up to the launch, and there were quite a few writers who were bestsellers at the time as well in it. And I was just chatting to one of them, and it was shortly after I'd been in touch with Jim Crace. He's just really approachable, and, you know, there are others as well. I don't want to sort of I don't actually want to drop names, but they're all on my, you know, you can, if you, anyway, it's all pretty obvious who I'm talking about. Well, I mean, it isn't, but it wouldn't be difficult to find out who I'm talking about, because it's all, they're on the website. But this one person, we were just chatting away, and then I tried to do something really rather experimental with the brief that we've been given for this commission. And it sort of worked, and I was, but it hadn't quite worked. But it being, you know, commission paid for and then they put it in. So we were just chatting away, and I just said, I just feel as though my piece was just a draft short. And she just said, yes. I thought as much, or something like that, but not in a lovely way, not in a sort of not, you know, in a really massively sneery sort of way. And it was just, and the thing was, her bestseller was just, you know, it was a piece of, well, I don't know, I haven't read it, but it's not really my sort of thing. But it's just, nobody would ever imagine that she would like a piece of short experimental fiction. So there were sort of no expectations, but why she felt the need to be so actively shitty, I don't know. And it was quite surprising, because, like I say, I generally have, you know, generally authors, you know, even busy authors, hard pressed authors, you know, if you approach them nicely, and you're polite, and you know what, they gave back, because I think most people understand that it's, you know, it's an ecosystem, and there's, you know, there's everything is connected, even people who write that sort of fiction and people who write that sort of fiction. Do you know what I mean? There are roots, and there are plus it's quite a small world, isn't it? So I was, you know, but it didn't discourage me. I just thought, and that was it. But it, you know, it could have been discouraging. That's the thing that could have been the most discouraging thing.
Yeah. Do you write every day? Do you have any set word counts or anything like that, or is it more when the mood takes you?
No, it's just when the mood takes me. And obviously you get asked this quite a lot as a writer, because I do a little bit of teaching, and this comes up quite often. And I always just say, whatever works, you have to find out what works for you, and what works for you might be writing every day for a week, and then not writing for 3 months, and then writing every day. You know what I mean? It's just whatever gets you from the idea to the finished project, whatever it is. There's as many different ways of writing a book as there are writers. Everyone does it differently. And I sometimes think that these rules not these rules, but like 10 rules for writing, of which one of them that seems to crop up quite frequently is you must write every day. And I just sometimes feel as though they might be sort of self-defeating, because if you don't write every day, or if you start off trying to write every day and then it's like, I don't know, it starts playing with you, and then it's like, oh no, I'm somehow not doing this right. And you're doing it right if you're, if you're on the way to finishing something, however you get there. So no, I don't. I just sort of fit. And also, there's a thing as well, which is that I've got a family, and when my kids were young, I was my wife was at work full time, I was at work part time, and looking after the kids. So if you work part time, looking after the kids, running a festival, for some of that time, I did a master's as well. You can't. Well, if you have to just fit it in, because you can't, and then also not beat yourself up when you can't fit it in, because it's like, So the idea of writing every day, if it works for you, that's great, But whatever works for you is the way you should write. That's what I think.
Do you have a surprising fact about you to share with us? Something surprising? It doesn't have to be anything to do with writing, an obsession, or just an interesting fact.
Well, an obsession. I'm not sure I do obsessions. I'm just, well, okay. There's quite a few. I mean, some of them are really sort of just sort of trivial. I wouldn't share the jacuzzi with Edwina Curry.
You did share a jacuzzi with Edwina Curry?
Only briefly. I mean, she was out pretty sharpish, but
I've been in a lift with Theresa May.
Have you?
So yeah, the encounter lasted exactly as long as it took to go up sort of five floors, with her security detail as well. So she seemed very nice. She smiled at me.
Oh, right, okay. But no. So there's lots of sort of little quirky things like that. Well, I say quirky. I mean, that's pushing it a bit, isn't it? Really.
That's quite good.
And then, but obsession-wise, well, I'm madly into. Well, I've just started to get into jazz.
Oh.
I mean, I'm a little bit behind the times, really, in that respect. But, sort of 19, hard bop and your bebop and your hard bop. So that's sort of maybe a little known. Yeah, all the bops. That's a sort of a little known. So 1959. If you look at 1959, there must be about 6 jazz albums released in that year. So there's, I'm going to forget them all now. Mingus. So I don't know. There's a Charlie Mingus. There was a Thelonious Monk. There was a John Coltrane. There's a pianist called John Lewis who, and there's just album after album for some reason in 1959 just makes this, for somebody who's even a passing interest in jazz, it's mind blowing. It's as though you had, I don't know, I can't think of a comparison, but that's the closest thing I have to a sort of an obsession at the moment is this kind of, I don't know if that's a.
Is that what you would listen to while writing? Are you somebody who listens to music while writing?
No, and I struggle with the idea that you can, because for me, listening isn't a passive. It has to be. You have to. So the only occasion where I can have something on in the background is when I'm cooking. But if I'm doing anything else that requires any degree of creative input, whatever it is, I can't have music on, because listening to music for me is a creative thing, because it's just, you can't. To me, there's no point in putting music on and then just having it on in the background. And people put music on and then it's like low enough that you can just about hear it, but you can't really hear it. And I was just like, why do you want to listen to music or do you not want to listen to music? Because if you don't want to listen to music, switch it off. And if you want to listen to music, turn it up. It's just like, what's the bloody point of that? Because every now and again, it's just like, and it's the background thing. No, just you listen to music, don't you? You go in, you put music on, and you listen to music, and you properly you again, it's that you immerse yourself in it. And so I can't write and listen to music.
Do you have a kind of dream alternative career, like something so different from writing that is possibly feasible in an alternative universe?
No.
Because just writing.
I've never really done anything that I've enjoyed. Even stuff that, because so if you buy into the work ethic thing as well, and the idea that that I don't know, so the work, right, okay, then you would think there's a correlation between doing stuff that you are reasonably good at. Not a correlation between that. Yeah, a correlation between that and the degree of satisfaction that you get from it. But I'm just generally not a big fan of work, and I just think there's things I do that I'm good at, but I only I only enjoy them for a short period of time, and then I'm like, nah. So I haven't really. Sorry.
You never had an urge to wear a high-vis jacket.
I have worn high-vis jackets. I've worn steel-toe cap boots. I've
hard hat.
Yeah, all that. But I mean, I'd rather not work. I'd rather my alternative career would be flaneur. That's what it would be.
Yeah,
I'm reading Robert Balser at the moment. When you were talking about earlier on, you were talking about who did you mention? You mentioned Rambo and his little self-contained.
Yes. Yeah, pieces. Illuminations or Illumination.
Okay, I haven't read any of them, but that sort of short, self-contained. Yeah, Balser was doing that after Rambo, but it's a very sort of. I'm from what you said, Rambo. It sounds quite sort of similar, and but he did a lot of walking as well, and I would just love to walk about, have a coffee every now and again, maybe a glass of wine, and then do some more walking, and I could just do that all day. That would be my career, and then every now and again just write it up.
And is that what you would do to reward yourself after you've finished a book or you've done some writing that you're pleased with? How do you have a little treat that you give yourself?
Yeah. Red wine.
Red wine.
Yeah. I do like a glass of red wine. Except that I'm normally quite excited. I'm normally quite hyper when I've finished something, and so it is of course a celebration. So it's possibly more than one relaxing glass of wine. It's probably a couple of 3 relaxing glasses of wine, or glasses of wine in the hope that they will relax me. Because it's not, because the thing is I don't work in drafts. I don't do a draft and then do another draft and then do another draft and then do another draft. I mean I do, but I don't I don't go through from the start to the finish. I go through and we'll do half a page and then make sure that half a page is right, and then move on to the next half a page. No, I mean, that still means at the end, you've still got editing to do and you still have a complete draft to work with. But I can't imagine ever sitting down and getting from the start to the finish in one continuous draft. Which again, it sort of goes up, it goes back to what I was saying about what works for other people. Because a lot of people do work like that, and then they get to the point where they've finished a draft. So the draft, when I finished a draft that is from the start to the end, it's a draft that is hopefully further along or closer to the completed thing, because I've been working. You work. Do you know what I mean? I can't write a second page if I'm not happy with my first page. So you kind of like, so that means that by the time I've finished a draft, as in a whole thing, from beginning to end, then I'm ready for a celebration. Whereas people who just go through and just do a draft and I've got another 20 drafts to do, it's like you kind of just hold on, there's work to do there. So yeah.
Will you write another novel, do you think?
I don't know. Well, I mean, I've written something that I've written something I've been trying to place for ages, and I think it's a novel, but it's not really very long. So and also nobody wants to buy it either. It's brilliant actually, and nobody's interested in it.
Novellas are in as well. It's very surprising.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, So it's So I think I have written another novel, but it's just I need to persuade other people that I've written another novel, and it's just a short novel, because I think structurally it's more of a novel than a novella. But I don't know actually, because I'm so wedded to the short story and to just short form writing. So let's say go back to Valsa and the stuff in the pamphlet, which is absolutely nothing like Valsa, but it involves just walking about and making a few observations.
The cat's walking about.
The cat's just about to eat my face in a minute. But, looks like, but I wouldn't. Anyway, so yes, so am I going to finish them? I don't know. I mean, I would like to, because that's where the I don't know. I see people. I don't know. There's still. It's still easier to get, because one of the reasons that I write is to be reviewed. I like to be reviewed. I like people to pick up on one of the different interpretations, or several of the different interpretations, and to go with them or go with it. Like I read a review of the pamphlet recently. There's a website called The Urban Wanderer. There's an awful lot of psychogeographical websites of psychogeographical interest, and it was just a brilliant review, because he was just saying, and he's trying to do this with this, and I mean, it just feels as though what you're doing is kind of is more than just an enormous vanity project. Really, it's like it feels as though because if you write a book and then you publish a book and then there's literally just like this tumbleweed. It's just I mean that because it takes me a long time to write a book. I mean that's quite dispiriting. So one of the reasons I write is to get reviewed, and novels seem to get reviewed more than collections of short stories or short Valsarian, not Valsarian, Valsa-esque, not even Valsa-esque, short pieces of psychogeography, which nobody seems interested in reviewing.
That is a very nice defence of the art of literary reviewing. So thank you for that. Now, I don't want the cat to eat your face, so I have one last question for you, which is, what do you wish if you went back to the young Charlie Hill embarking on his career as a writer, is there something that you would say to him about publishing? What did you wish you'd known before you started this quixotic career? I don't know. I mean, is there anything that surprised you about how publishing works or how writing works?
No, there's things that have surprised me because they're sort of obvious, and then I hadn't twigged them. So when I was a lot of my stuff comes out with small publishers, and they don't have marketing departments or anything like that, and so you do a lot of publicity yourself, and they do publicity, and I quite like that. I like being involved in that. But then I had a book come out with a slightly bigger publisher, and they had a marketing department, and they were just all over. They were sending me stuff saying, right, we want to write a blog from the perspective of one of the characters in the book. And then so I was, oh, it's a brilliant idea. So I did that. And then they were like, oh no, we can't use that now. And I'm going, well, I've spent quite a lot of time on it. And again, but they were firing these ideas at me, and I was just thinking, this is brilliant. All these people working on my behalf to try and make this a success. And then 6 months to the day after the book was published, I sent, because I'm quite enthusiastic about this as well. I was sending off another one of my sort of, oh, I had another idea for da 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 da, oh, da 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 da. And then it was just sort of like nothing came back, and I was going, and then nothing came back, and literally that was it. I'd reached this sort of dump, and initially I was like, why aren't they getting back to me? You know, there's normally like this. They're sort of like firing off ideas, and I'm firing off ideas, and I'm getting enthusiastic. They're getting enthusiastic. They're getting me to do things and spend time on things that they then don't use. And then all of a sudden, just dead and no response. And afterwards, I was thinking like, well, it's obvious, isn't it? You know, they have more books coming out, and they have to then put that time into the next, you know, and my time is up. And you know, presumably if it had sold more copies, they might have been a bit more interested. But either way, you know, you probably have. Okay, you have 6 months to work on this, and then that's it. And so that did surprise me, but it surprised me more because it surprised me, because it shouldn't really have surprised me, because my book was about the book was books, and it was about publishing and how publishers work in certain ways, and the publishing industry works in certain ways, and da 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 da. You know, that was so it was like, and then I was surprised when the publishing industry worked in the way in which I had lampooned the publishing industry for working. Which, so. But I haven't really discovered anything that was, because I hadn't really any preconceptions. You know, you just go into it. You know, I write books and then send them off, and then no.
People say that about agents as well, that they have the period when the agent, unless you're super huge, you know, the agent is absolutely, you know, all systems go, and then next thing you know, you can't get your agent on the phone anymore. From what I've heard,
that's one of the reasons why I don't bother with agents. Another reason is because, you know, again, I have been down that route. I've had agents or an agent, and I kind of don't really see what they do really. I don't see how they're worth their 15% of zero. I'm teaching, but yeah. So I'm kind of, you know, it's like I'm not, yeah. And although actually it's quite interesting because I used to go into universities with a writer called Ruby Cowling, who's a short story writer, and she's much garlanded as the term, the phrase is. So she's always entering prizes, and we used to go into universities and we used to talk about the short story publishing scene and how to identify journals and magazines, how to put together a collection, how to submit stuff, how to establish relationships with editors, and there was essentially an oppositional perspective when it came to getting an agent and the importance of awards. And I would always argue that there was no point in getting an agent, and so many awards that not remotely interested in awards. And Ruby, who'd won loads of awards and was quite keen on getting an agent, would argue the other one. And it was kind of interesting because you had students and we were, you know, it's nice to have that sort of. Well, I'm sure, presumably was. I don't know. It seemed to be. You know, it's kind of it's an interesting setting up of sort of two opposing perspectives.
Dialectic.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, can't get the words out. But so I was, yeah. But I've just been shortlisted for an award, and so my short stories. And now I can't get enough of them. I think they're brilliant. I absolutely recommend awards and everything to do with them. The whole thing about them being just like, you know, just the narrowing down, just this kind of fetishistic commodification of art. I don't mind that. It's great.
Let's have more of it.
Yes, yeah. Just as long as it's my art you're fetishistically commodifying, I don't mind.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I think you should go and feed the cat and probably pour yourself a rewarding glass of red wine. Might be a bit early, but I think you've deserved it. But thank you for joining me once again in the book bag. And yeah, well, I hope we can tempt you down from Brum sometime, and we will meet again in person. That would be really fun. But in the meantime, thank you for joining me in the book bag.
Much appreciated. We really enjoyed it.
Right. Okay. See you anon.
Ta-da.
And thank you very much for watching me and Charlie Hill chatting away, one of my favourite book bag people. This is his latest. Keeps calling it a pamphlet, but if you think about it like a poetry collection, I would call it a slender volume. Snapshots of a compromised land, and absolutely fascinating. So long may he wander and be a flaneur. Join me next time. I shall find somebody else fascinating to talk to. Thanks again for watching. And like and subscribe if you possibly can. That's a big help.